You're listening to Simple Health Radio, the podcast about recognizing medical emergencies and promoting wellness. Your host is Dr. Emron, an experienced ER physician who has treated thousands of people just like you. Information on the show is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Always talk to your doctor or go to the nearest emergency room with any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Simple Health Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Emron. Today we're going to be talking about osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a medical problem that's actually becoming much more common. It does affect men and women, but typically there are certain groups of people that are more likely to be affected. So I thought this would be a very good opportunity to break all of that down and explain what osteoporosis actually is, how we diagnose it, and what the risk factors and other treatment options are. Now, osteoporosis, by definition, actually means porous bones. What that means is the bones have a solid nature to them, but as we get older, they actually become porous. They get holes. And if you look at the bones of someone who has osteoporosis under a microscope, it'll look like a honeycomb because there'll be spaces of the bone that are eaten away and they don't regrow. The reason this happens is that bones are not considered static. That means that the bones actually break down and are redeveloped. So the bones are constantly being created by cells called osteoblasts with a B, and they're constantly being cut up and broken down by osteoclasts with a C. So osteoblasts create new bone. Osteoclasts actually cut up the old bone and break it down into calcium and the other ingredients. Now, in children, there's going to be more activity of building up the bone. So you're going to have more blast cells, basically. And that's how children become taller. So when they're very young, they have soft, very flexible bones. As the blasts work, the bones get more solid, more durable, and they get taller. As we get older, the clasts will take over and they break down that bone. And that's why some people, if you notice, when they're much older, like in their 60s and 70s, they actually look shorter than when they were in their 30s and 40s because their bones are actually being resorbed, but they're being broken down. Now, the entire skeleton from head to toe is actually broken down and reformed every 10 years. And that sounds kind of strange because you're not taking your bones out, but the body is breaking them down piece by piece and replacing that. So the bone that you touch today in your body is not the same bone that you had 10 years ago. And if you go back 20 years or 30 years, you've actually had a complete turnover. This is very similar to a treadmill or an assembly line because the body is breaking it down and rebuilding it up. So that's osteoporosis. You're going to see holes in the bone because it's been broken down. Now, how do we diagnose it? Well, there's a special test called a DEXA. A DEXA is a bone density X-ray scan. Many people have X-rays. So if they have an injury, car accident, sports injury, they'll have a simple 1-view, 2-view, 3-view X-ray, which can be done in the clinic or the emergency room. But a bone density DEXA scan is actually more targeted. So it provides a score. And what will happen is the radiologist will provide a T-score. T is the deviation from normal. So if a T-score is minus 2.5 or worse, that is osteoporosis. If the score is minus 1 to 2.4 negative, that's called osteopenia, meaning the bones are breaking down. They don't quite meet the criteria for osteoporosis, but in a few years, it will get worse. Okay, so the T-score is the value that your doctor is going to look at to diagnose whether you have osteoporosis, osteopenia, or normal bone density. Now, where does the T come from? What does that mean? So the T is actually because of women in their 20s. That's actually the peak bone density. And after your 20s, you start to lose bone density. So this is a comparison. If you're a 65-year-old female, you get a T-score of minus 2.5. You have osteoporosis. That was compared to a woman's T-score when she was in her 20s. Okay? So that's how that's calculated. Now, why do we notice osteoporosis later in life? Well, it's a silent disease because you don't feel your bones breaking. That's not exactly how the disease works. It's going to be over a long period of time. Many years of bone breakdown will cause it to become weaker and more porous. And that's what we are concerned by. What we don't want are the hip fractures, wrist fractures, and spinal fractures, because as the bones become weaker, there is a higher and higher chance that simple injuries will cause broken bones. What we're trying to prevent are hip fractures, okay? Hip fractures are very deadly, meaning between 30 and 50% of people who have a hip fracture, if they're older, will actually die in 12 months. And that's a very negative, very horrible figure. So if you have a perfectly healthy person who lives with their family, lives alone in an apartment or a nursing home, they walk around, they make lunch, they eat, they communicate very well, they're doing well. But if they have a fall and they have osteoporosis, if that person breaks their hip, there is a 50-50 chance they will die before the year is over. And that's why we are trying to change osteoporosis statistics to improve them, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of people having preventable deaths due to hip fractures. Now, in the United States alone, last year there were over 2 million broken bones directly due to osteoporosis. So 2 million ER visits, urgent care visits, primary care visits, all related to osteoporosis. And that cost the entire society over $19 billion in medical aid and lost revenue, basically. So 2 million broken bones a year are due to osteoporosis. Now, what causes osteoporosis? Why do some people get it and other people don't? So there are some people that have a high risk, certain groups of individuals. So oftentimes white women, Caucasian women, or Asian women who are very, very petite. So women who they look very healthy otherwise, but they're very, very petite, are at the highest risk of developing osteoporosis. So if you think of the show like Golden Girls, which was a comedy TV show, all of those women were older, they were senior citizens, and you could see those are the type of people who are going to be at highest risk of developing osteoporosis. And if they have a fall, they will have a fracture. Now, there's different types of multiple medications that can actually cause bone loss directly or indirectly. Things that include over-the-counter medications. So medications like antacids. A lot of people take Nexium, Prilosec. That actually has a link with hip fractures and osteoporosis. Medications like bipolar disorder treatments, including lithium. People take steroids for asthma or for rheumatoid arthritis can actually develop osteoporosis. A lot of blood thinners and cancer medications also cause bone loss. And then one of the more common ones is actually soda. So drinking Pepsi, Coke, any of those things has a very high amount of phosphorus, which is the acidic part of the soda, and that breaks down the calcium in the bones. So drinking a large amount of soda is actually linked with osteoporosis. Now, other people who don't have a medical reason for it can also develop it, including those who smoke, people who drink a lot of alcohol, anyone with a history of anorexia or bulimia, and people who don't really walk much or they don't exercise very often. So eating disorders have a direct link with osteoporosis, especially in younger women. So if you have someone in high school or college who has anorexia or bulimia, they're not absorbing nutrients because they don't eat proper food or they vomit. And so they're not able to get the calcium, vitamin D, and other nutrition that they need. So later in life, 20 or 30 years later, they're going to have very brittle bones and they will develop a high risk of osteoporosis. Now, what we also worry about are men. So about 25% of men, as they age, are going to be at risk of osteoporosis. About 50% of women are going to be at risk of osteoporosis, but 25% of men. So that still represents a large number of the population. These are millions of people. Now, there are medications that can help osteoporosis. So if you have a concern, you go talk to your doctor, they do a DEXA scan, your T-score is very low, your doctor will offer you medication. The first one is always going to be calcium and vitamin D because those are easy to obtain, they're low cost, and they have basically no side effects. So your doctor will always encourage calcium and vitamin D. They will offer you prescription medications, and there's some common ones called bisphosphonates. So bisphosphonates prevent the breakdown of bones. They can't make new bones, but they prevent the breakdown of the bones. And some common brand names include Actonel, Boniva, Reclast, and Fosamax. And there's a few others, and some of these are generic now, but you might see these commercials on TV. So these are Actonel, Boniva, Reclast, Fosamax, and they all have some warnings because there are side effects with all of these medications. Your doctor has to do special blood testing before you can start them, and then you have to be monitored. You have to be consistent with your follow-up with your doctor. There are newer medications that may also help, which are injectable drugs. These are given once a year or twice a year or more often, depending on what your needs are. So these would replace pills. If people can't swallow pills, then that would be the other alternative. So again, osteoporosis is a very serious problem. I'll have some more information on our website so you can read it and link to some of the society links and pages to learn more about that. But I highly encourage all men and women who are of a certain age to talk with their doctor and get screened. So it's a simple DEXA scan. It's painless. There's no injections or anything like that. Your doctor will get the results, talk it over with you, and see what's best for you because we're trying to prevent hip fractures and other serious life-threatening events. So I hope you learned a little bit about osteoporosis and osteopenia and the diagnostic testing for all of this kind of complicated bone issues. But I do hope that you share this information with your family and friends You can follow us online on social media and visit our website, simplehealthradio.com, and I look forward to having you back on a future episode.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Visit simplehealthradio.com to read the blog, follow links mentioned on this episode, and easily share content with your family and friends. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and the 3 and Out Radio Network. Be sure to connect with Dr. Emron on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Tumblr to send us your questions and ideas.